We would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay our respects to our elders past and present.
So my name is Natalie Lewis. I'm a Gamilaroi woman and I have been the CEO of QATSICPP for the last 7 years. This journey of reflecting back on looking at our sector and where we came from, I think, was really uplifting and really important for us to do as an organisation, because legacy is so incredibly important.
When I reflect back to when my involvement with ACCA, well, it was definitely with Townsville, but I was also part of the National Child Protection Peak, SNAKE. I think in those days, the old ACCA became the lobbyist for the voice of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children that were overrepresented in the department. Also trying to clean up the mess of the past practice of stolen generation removal of children purely because of who you are or where you lived. So I was part of that in the 80s, early 90s.
Well, we became involved at the very beginning of childcare. Before that, the beginning was based on the medical centre at the time, ATSIC. What did we used to do? ATSIC? No, not ATSIC. AICS.
AICS.
It used to be called AICS. Now it's called H's. AICS. And they had 1 or 2 people, I think, if I remember correctly, working in childcare. But the work, referrals and so on, just a whole lot of things to do with Aboriginal families and the children was becoming overwhelming for the medical centre. So they became more and more needing extra people to sort of work in the area, and so it got up to actually 3 people. I think around about that time there was a shift to become more independent. And so they actually, that was okay for AICS, if I remember correctly, that we got a different, what do you call it, a place, an office somewhere else away from AICS. And it started to be a really independent body then.
Yes.
So
I was the inaugural president.
Inaugural president. That's right.
And I was working at the University of Queensland at the time in the social work department, and then Mary became the director or CEO of the childcare agency, and that's when it really developed.
Started to develop then more.
Yeah.
How did we find ourselves in this situation where we're not in control of our own lives and communities?
Yes.
So lots of discussions, lots of movements, and I think it was the real beginning of us developing a particular way, Aboriginal version of community development, our way of doing it. And it was really basic almost like the ABC of community development. That is that Aboriginal community development has to be in the hands of Aboriginal people, not in the hands of anybody else either.
And I think that's what was important, how that understanding of what Aboriginal terms of reference laid the foundation for the operation of the childcare agency.
Yes.
So that when families did come to us, it was understood we were immediately on their side, sort of thing.
Yeah,
I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, we were their champions.
Yeah.
The people who worked there and the whole philosophy of the organisation,
Yes.
basically.
That
Attitude
government mentality of always making us victims.
Victimising, yeah.
Yeah, victimising the community, and that really got up our nose, you know. And I think because it was the BLK government that was in power at the time, and he had given a directive to Children's Services not to have anything to do with the Aboriginal Childcare Agency. And people though in the state government's Children's Services, they had some very good people who came to work with us after dark and would really help. They were very helpful.
Very helpful,
especially when it came to trying to change the legislation in regards to Aboriginal people. And Mary was very instrumental in that and worked very hard with particular people in the Children's Services to create that legislation. What was the name of that woman?
The child placement principle.
Yes, yes.
And
I just think of how sometimes how I remember the families coming to us and saying that they're going to come and take our kids away and sending our workers out. And, and the police coming in the front door. And our workers at the back door passing the kids out the window and zooming off in cars and saving the children.
Saving the children.
That's how we saw it, you know, we're saving the children.
Literally car chases in the street. You know,
Yes,
things like
absolutely.
That. I mean, it's just amazing, really.
I mean, we did whatever we could for the kids to keep them with families and relatives.
Nothing was too much.
And one of the things that was very distressing to us was how when they did take children away, they sent them to white families.
Oh, yes.
And that was very distressing. And so one of the things we tried to do too is try to influence those white families.
Yes, that's right.
That were taking kids, remember? And some of the white families even came to us.
Yeah, it was a real a spectrum, you know. Some of the worst cases, when I say worst cases, like I'm remembering one lady there, we were floored by some of the questions she would ask, and one of them was something like, do Aboriginal babies cry the same as other babies? You couldn't believe
the ignorance, you know.
The ignorance was just overwhelming. We were speechless, you know.
In the 90s, when you had the deaths in custody inquiry, that led to some really big changes to Child Protection Act. So in 1992, that was the first time the Child Protection Act was updated, and that was a result of the Royal Commission into Deaths in Custody. So, and that had very clear already information in there around how to work with Aboriginal kids, how they could be placed, and the start of the child placement principle, and that was already in the Act in the 90s. So the ACCA that was already around then was very strong with making sure that you work appropriately with our families and placing them with family and consulting with the ACCAs. So that frame was very strong within child protection throughout the state and definitely with child safety. So with that sort of being, I guess, cast aside a bit from the government, with the CMC inquiry was a big concern. So that then led to obviously a whole lot of us then wanting to get together, I guess, a new peak body to represent, you know, our voices throughout the states.
These are the AGM speech notes, a report of the retiring chairperson. For today marks a momentous occasion in our long journey to create a strong Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander child protection sector. In 2003, ACCAs came together to contribute to the CMC inquiry into the abuse of children in foster care, which resulted in 12 significant recommendations about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. These included recommendations about the expansion and adequate funding of the ACCA network across Queensland. This partnership was formalised with the signing of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Child Protection Partnership Agreement in Hervey Bay in April 2004. The Queensland Aboriginal and Islander Health Council, QATSICPP, and the peak health body for community controlled health services in Queensland has worked with the Queensland Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Child Protection Partnership in establishing a strategic partnership which included auspicing the new peak funding. Without this support, we may never have reached the point we are at today. We look forward to continue to work with QATSICPP as a fellow peak body, striving for improvements in the well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families. The concept of a peak body dedicated to providing overall leadership in Queensland and developing the capacity of its members originated with the members of the partnership who worked towards the new organisation and who are called in our constitution the founding members. These founding members are Central Queensland Aboriginal and Islander Childcare Agency Incorporated, Mackay Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Corporation for Alternative Care and Foster Care Service, the Aboriginal and Islander Community Health Service Brisbane Limited, Baramba Aboriginal and Islander Community Care Agency Incorporated, Kalwin Development Corporation Limited, Bargama Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Corporation and Wuchopper and Health Service Limited. We are pleased today to acknowledge the dedication and enthusiasm of the partnership and the individual member organisations and communities that constitute its membership and its achievements over the past 4 years, and furthermore to acknowledge the launch of the peak body through its inaugural annual general meeting. We are also pleased to welcome the representatives of the new recognised entities and to extend to them an invitation to join us in our ongoing task of supporting our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families to raise happy, healthy, proud, strong children who will take pride in their cultural heritage and identity. On behalf of the Queensland Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Child Protection Peak, I wish to reiterate our commitment to working in partnership with the Department of Child Safety and acknowledge the support and leadership of Minister Keach in addressing overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people in Queensland's child protection system and in achieving greater adherence to the child placement principle. A true partnership is one where all partners have equal capacity to engage and contribute to development, implementation and evaluation of strategies to achieve mutual and agreed objectives. The mutual objectives of the Queensland Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Child Protection Peak and the Department of Child Safety being the development and implementation of an effective and comprehensive response to addressing the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families. The partnership is also committed to working with other partners in the non-government sector to address the needs of our children, young people and families in Queensland. Your attendance here today is an indication of your support for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander child protection sector, addressing the needs of our children, and addressing overrepresentation in the child protection system has already begun and will be our paramount focus for the future.
It was an odd thing that happened because in the 90s our services at some level were besieged by government around regulations and looking, what would they say, lack of capacity around compliance, and they would say all these different things, and they closed down a lot of different services. And so Brisbane AICS, where I'm currently the CEO, took over the role of Brisbane ACCA and sort of formed this IFACS group, and IFACS was in place for some time, and it was really this notion that we would give it back out and it would become its own entity. But as time went on, the integration of child protection and the needs of our most vulnerable children and their families and the close link to health became very clear. So all of our child protection work is now integrated into AICS Brisbane.
When I joined QATSICPP back in 2005, I met most of the members at a meeting in Mount Isa. I guess that probably opened my eyes around that there was no particular voice across Queensland to advocate for a number of children that we had that weren't being placed according to the child placement principle. And so there were lots of talks, I think, from about recognised entities, which members really had some robust discussions.
I worked with Alf and Jody in the department for quite a few years while they were developing the new legislation. And back in those days there was a strong voice for ACCAs through what they called at that point state ACCA. And that group of agencies would meet very regularly with the department to help formulate policy, and back then it was the new legislation. And in those days people were adhering to the child placement principle on principle and not because it was law. And then this was seen as the next step, big step to make it even better, is to put it into law. And so that was all done by 1999. But soon after that, the department and a whole range of other issues, that whole state ACCA system failed. There was inquiry after inquiry, and particularly the CMC inquiry in 2004 was very harsh, and often those inquiries try to find someone to blame. And at that point, one of the groups that was blamed was the ACCAs, and it came to the point that you weren't even allowed to say ACCA at a meeting, and it was very difficult times. And the irony or the difficulty was that at the most difficult time for these agencies, the peak body funding was also removed, and there was just no voice there for the agencies or for the people. And QATSICPP, which is the peak body for the health services, who often did run ACCAs, saw that as a real issue and started to work on that to get a voice. So it meant that the new peak body, or even as it was being developed in a very hostile environment in which there was very little insight into the best way to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families or agencies, and a reduction in funding and resources, and it was a very hard time.
Well, the motivation for establishing QATSICPP in the 2004, 2006 era when I was there was because it was after the CMC inquiry into abuse in foster care, and it was pretty clear that most of the department at that stage did not want to have ACCAs around, so there was a pretty big push to defund and to sort of sideline ACCAs, which concerned a lot of people in the field. So at that stage there was Adrian Carson was the CEO of QATSICPP, Jodie Curry was running the child protection programs, and I was involved with another program, but because of my child protection background, I was involved with that as well. And it was a whole lot of people in the sector. There were still some of the old ACCAs, like with Lynn Guidry, Mark Moore, Greg Upkett at Brisbane Eggs, Rachel, obviously at TARS. I had Roy Tropham with Leanne and whatnot. Mount Isa was involved, Mel Walker, Donna Klein. There was people all through the state that still wanted the ACCAs to continue in some way, shape or form. So that was the start of that movement, I guess, in 2004 onwards.
I think we've really got a strong voice in influencing policy. I really think that when you look at examples like the legislative reform that occurred, in the last 18 months, I never thought that we would be in the situation where Queensland has the most progressive child protection legislation, where our kids truly are honoured and where we have those 5 elements of the child placement principle embedded within that legislation, holding governments accountable to our children's right to cultural continuity. I think as an organisation, when we look at our more recent history, I think we as a group have a lot to be proud of. We've achieved some really significant things, and I guess those that stand up for me most are being able to have the first ever dedicated community controlled Child Protection Awards. We are absolutely committed to raising the profile of our organisations. We know there are pockets of brilliance that happen in our organisations every single day that haven't captured the imagination of research agendas. So I feel like it's our obligation to make sure that we let people know we build an evidence base that is about us, that is about our children, and that really reflects the tremendous work that is done in this sector every single day. We've been able to, through the standards, we embarked on this process of self-regulation. We set the benchmark for ourselves because in terms of a government agenda around human services quality framework, cultural practice was not mentioned. We know that that's integral to achieving good outcomes for our children, and we know that we're best placed to do that. So we worked with the sector to develop a set of practice standards that will guide our implementation of reforms, but also that set the bar for all other services that have the privilege of interacting with our families. We've been able to translate that into some really strong training modules to support the sector. But beyond that, we thought, we were tired of, it being acceptable that, just do a little bit of training here or do a Cert 4. And we know our sector is more than that. We know we're capable. And so we aimed higher. We worked with Griffith University and we produced the first ever graduate certificate that is wholly and solely developed on the work that our sector does with our families every single day. Some of the other sort of major achievements, I think I talked a little bit about legislation, that's been really important, but the Family Matters campaign and the emergence of that has really come from our involvement in the national policy agenda. Through the Family Matters campaign, we articulated a framework for transformational change for children and families involved in the child protection system. Those 4 pillars from the Family Matters campaign form the platform for the 20-year generational strategy that the department launched called Our Way. And it's the first jurisdiction to ever co-lead a 20-year strategy to eliminate the overrepresentation of our kids in out-of-home care. And without QATSICPP, that would not have been possible. And without QATSICPP, that won't succeed. And QATSICPP, when I talk about QATSICPP, it's not the staff group here. It is all those people before us. It is our board, but most importantly, it's our members.
I think our QATSICPP is constantly at the table with government. We've contributed towards the strategy of Our Way, which is now a strategic plan addressing all the issues that are impacting on our families and our children, and government being accountable for what they should be doing. So there's a monitoring process with that. In terms of QATSICPP, I don't want to underestimate the power base that we've become. And to get to where we are now, we've had to bring on and continue that legacy of where ACCA was to where we are now. The first message I would is acknowledge the fantastic work that each and every one has contributed in the last 10 years. And look where we are now. We're stronger, we've all come together, and we're all beginning to have that one voice.
There's a long road ahead for us. And I take my hat off to each and every one of you for the work that you have done today. But let's continue the fight and be strong and proud in terms of what we're doing and turning out, and call it in instead of calling it out when we're talking to our non-Indigenous colleagues around child protection for our families. Thank you.
It's to say thank you to all our elders and people who, because you told me about the stories of the aunties in the days before I came along, and if it wasn't for them, where would we be?
I'd like to acknowledge, everybody who has gotten us to this stage, and there has been some really good stuff that has happened, and the challenges, we've overcome quite a few challenges.
10th anniversary, gee, time has flown, I hope that everybody does come together and actually celebrate. Whilst child protection is a rather hard and sensitive issue, it is sensitive and hard because it means so much to us. It's about Mel Walker, who's not with us anymore. His words were, it's about our little people. And our little people now are our little people, but they're our generation into the future. So I hope that for the 10th anniversary, people come together and actually reflect on the hard work that has been done. And there's even more hard work that's into the future, but knowing that it's grounded because it's about our little people.